Mali, a country that was, at one point in history, one of the wealthiest countries in Africa, now no longer. Since January 2012, the local government has been fighting a civil war against Tuareg and Arab rebel movements in the Azawad region, along with several Islamic terrorist groups operating in the country. Several members of the UN, notably France, moved to help stabilize the region through peacekeeping operations that involved military intervention and external aid. The French contingent, alongside their allies and Malinese troops, were able to push the rebels and insurgents northwards. Their operation was considered successful overall, as they were able to dislodge the insurgents from key settlements in the north. They transitioned into counterinsurgency and stabilizing operations until August 2020, when the new military junta took power in Mali. The new government had their disagreements with the French and requested that the French military contingent withdraw from the region. The French complied, and this left a void in terms of security in the region, as 5,000 French troops were redirected to other regions in Africa or were routed back to France. Russia and China moved to increase their presence in the region. However, Wagner was quick to fill the void, as they deployed just a year later in December 2021, alongside Russian regulars. This was no small commitment either, as they brought several aircraft and ground vehicles to support Mali in securing the region. Russia itself is in the middle of its own war, so the inevitable question is, why involve themselves in Africa in the first place? Mali is not the only place where Wagner and Russian regulars are stationed. The reasons are geopolitical and economical. First, Russia wants to increase its global influence and power projection. By positioning itself in Africa and pursuing closer relationships with the nations there, they can stoke anti-Western sentiments and create a new theater where they can compete with the West. Second, Africa is a continent rich with natural resources. With how the war in Ukraine is going and how Russia's trade is being choked by international embargoes, Africa may present a new opportunity for Russia to fill their coffers. The Malinese, Russian, and Wagner troops took over bases and other military infrastructure that was left over after Operation Barkhane, the French counterinsurgency operation that began in 2014 and ended in 2022. Wagner supported Malinese troops in policing the region and was often violent towards the locals. This excessive force led to a displaced population and growing support for the rebel movements based in the Azawad region. Despite this, Wagner and Malinese forces were still finding success. This is because the different groups in the Azawad region are not unified in their efforts. Some groups were formed to protect their autonomy against the Malinese, and other groups were formed around extremist jihadist ideologies. These groups are often at odds with each other, which made it easy for the combined Wagner and Malinese forces to deal with them. However, things would take an interesting turn as locals in the north began to experience a gold rush, as artisanal gold was being dug up near Gao and Kidal. This did not go unnoticed by Wagner and their Malinese allies. They immediately moved north and took control of a gold mine in Gao, where they established a base of operations. On the 2nd of October 2023, they gathered up an armored column composed of both Malinese and Wagner troops to push further north to take control of more mines. Publicly, they were moving north to pacify the regions and perform decolonization operations. However, while moving through the various villages and towns, Wagner used terror tactics to keep the civilian population in line. The Tuareg rebels responded by fighting back through asymmetrical warfare. Near the end of 2023, Wagner and Malinese forces were set back by a number of losses and defeats. However, this did not stop their aggressive push north that would continue to put the different militant groups in the area on the defensive. By mid-July 2024, Wagner and Malinese forces were set to completely push out the Tuareg contingent. The Wagner and Malinese military planned to take two places considered to be the last strongholds of the Tuareg rebels near the Mali-Algeria border, Ain Afarak and Tinzaouaten. The Malinese forces, supported by Wagner, moved to attack both strongholds at the same time from their base in Tessalit. The first armored column of 21 vehicles captured Ain Afarak without resistance. A second armored column, under Wagner's 13th Assault Detachment, moved to Bugessa on their way to Tinzaouaten and stayed there for the night. The detachment had 24 vehicles, around 6 of which were MRAPs, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, along with anywhere between 80 to 120 infantry. The route from Bugessa to Tinzaouaten presented some difficulty. In the way were a number of rocky hills and mountains, which meant that Wagner had to take an indirect route through several valleys and cross open deserts. This presented the Tuareg fighters in the area a perfect opportunity to hit the convoy and harass Wagner's forces. The next day, while crossing one of the many dry riverbeds and valleys, the Wagner Malinaise convoy ran into an IED, taking out one of the MRAPs, a sign of things to come, as the last third of the journey over July 23-24 was marked with several ambushes and hit-and-run attacks against a persistent Tuareg force. These attacks forced the Wagner Malinaise convoy to slow down as they accumulated damage to their vehicles and sustained minor casualties, moving towards Tinzaouaten. These rebels were not lightly armed. They had vehicles with large caliber weapons mounted on the back, RPGs, light machine guns, and so on. The same weapons the Russians themselves designed and created several decades ago. By the 25th, the 13th Assault Detachment finally made it to Tinzaouaten. However, the rest was not on the travel itinerary for the Wagner Malinaise force. At around 3 p.m., they had to redeploy towards the gold mine towns just southeast of Tinzaouaten and engage the Tuareg rebels. Tuareg rebels immediately engaged the Wagner Malinaise forces moving into the gold mining towns, abandoning their hit-and-run ambush tactics and beginning a prolonged skirmish against the 13th Assault Detachment. Just like before, the Wagner Malinaise force was met with all manner of heavy fire from the Tuareg force. After some time, both forces regrouped their forces to prepare for another confrontation. In the initial clash near the mining towns, the rebels claimed that they were able to destroy 4 enemy vehicles, 2 of which were the 13th Assault Detachment's precious MRAPs. The pressure on the 13th Assault Detachment had only just started to mount. When they were given the opportunity to regroup, the Tuareg force was able to recuperate from their losses and call in additional fighters and heavier weapons, like mortars. The beleaguered Wagner Malinaise force that had endured constant hit-and-run attacks now had to contend with the sustained assault from a well-armed Tuareg contingent. On the 26th, the fighting continued, and the Tuareg rebels quickly turned the tables on their attackers by bringing their arms to bear against the 13th Assault Detachment. The attackers had now found themselves pushed on the defensive as they called for a helicopter from the airport at Kidal. The helicopter helped in pushing the Tuareg force back and provided medevac wounded. However, air support was short-lived, as eventually these helicopters had to make their way back to repair and rearm. Allegedly, one of these aircraft crashed as it attempted to land in Kidal, and it is unclear whether there were any casualties. This did not do the Wagner Malinaise force any favors, because on the 27th, more Tuareg fighters reinforced the forces assaulting the compound. The commander of the 13th Assault Detachment, Sergei Shevchenko, made the decision to retreat under the cover of air support. However, the weather took a sudden turn as a sandstorm rolled in and grounded all aircraft. Now the Wagner Malinaise force had to move southwest in poor visibility while being pursued by rebels who were acclimated to these conditions. The Wagner Malinaise force was harassed by fast-moving technicals and pickup trucks that were able to follow and overtake the convoy as they were making their retreat. These hit-and-run tactics slowly funneled them into a rocky valley for a prolonged ambush. As the convoy entered the kill zone, they were attacked on both flanks by Tuareg forces utilizing their heavy weapons to pin down the vehicles. It did not help that the sandstorm had disrupted the cohesion of the Wagner Malinaise forces, making it easy for the Tuareg rebels to pin down and destroy sections of the retreating convoy. In released pictures and footage, the rebels show that they were able to not only destroy several vehicles, they were also able to capture an MRAP. However, the woes for the Wagner Malinese force did not end there. Even when they finally got their cohesion back together and began moving out of the kill zone, their path put them in the territory of jihadists. While they were at odds with both Wagner and the Malinese government, they were no friends of the Tuareg rebels either. On this day, however, they made an exception. Both groups now set their sights on the retreating convoy. The jihadists deployed their own assortment of weapons, now including car bombs. These car bombs infiltrated the convoy's formation, using the cover of the sandstorm, and caused havoc in the Wagner Malinese force. The Tuareg rebels continued to chase them into jihadist territory, which only further ensnared any remaining Wagner Malinese forces in several clashes and ambushes. With no other way out, the convoy pushed forward, fighting all the way to their final destination in another rocky valley. There, the jihadists dealt the final blow to the convoy. Fighters from the jihadist group, armed with RPGs, car bombs, and large-caliber machine guns mounted on the back of technicals, having lost most of their MRAPs and the rest of their vehicles turned into Swiss cheese, the remaining Wagner Malinese force continued to fight until they had run out of ammo or had been killed. The final radio transmission from the commander of the convoy conveyed the futility of their struggle. "The three of us left. We continue the fight." The Wagner Malinese force had been completely annihilated. According to the accounts made by Tuareg rebels, they either captured or killed more than 80 of the Wagner Malinese force, with possibly more lost to the jihadists. This battle was seen as a major setback for Russia's involvement in Africa. The bigger picture of global politics even seems to point that Ukraine was indirectly involved, as they allegedly trained some of the Tuareg rebels to fight as a response to Wagner's deployment in the region, with Russia even accusing Ukraine of being directly involved in the attacks themselves. There are speculations as to what Russia plans to do next as a response to their losses, but some believe that they may pull personnel and equipment from the Ukrainian front to replace what had been lost in Tinzawaten disaster. In fact, some speculate that the Russian government may actually use this defeat as an excuse to further tighten the leash on Wagner and replace Wagner's forces with forces from the Russian African Corps. After all, it is no secret that the Russian government and Wagner have an uneasy relationship after the attempted coup under Prigozhin's leadership back in 2023. However, with the ongoing Ukrainian incursion into Kursk, these speculations, if true, might be put on hold as Russia rushes to respond to the incursion. Despite this, the strategic and geopolitical situation continues to develop as Wagner forces are still deployed in several countries in Africa. Only time will tell whether or not Africa, an already unstable region, will become another active point of contention between Russia and the West.